Hello everyone, hello, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who do not know me, I am ASMR Majestic. Please remember to hit that subscribe button. Please give this video a thumbs up, and in today's comment, let me know, did you ever watch Bob Ross, or did you even know who he was? Let's talk about it. One other thing too, if you have a quick moment, please check out my new merch store, and please follow me on all my social media platforms. And if you like to and like longer videos, think about supporting me on my Patreon. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, how can I run an ASMR channel? Actually, two, because I lost my first one. But how can I have a ASMR channel and not talk about Bob Ross? Has anyone done that? Maybe they have. Although I wouldn't know because I don't go on other people's pages trying to see what they're doing. So, but anyway, I thought this would be a good, fun video idea. So this is not like Hollywood scandal, more like Hollywood story of Bob Ross. Now, I must admit, back in the day when he was on the air, I think it was called like PBS or PSB. I think it was PBS. I think it was like a half an hour show, maybe a little less, I don't know. And he would sit there and he would paint. Now, back then, I did not know, of course, what ASMR was, and tingles and sensations and none of that stuff. That being said, a lot of people liked his voice. I was the opposite. I mean, I loved his voice, but there was something about that paintbrush. Anytime he would paint it on the canvas, and he'd be like, yeah, just like that, just like that, just like that, just like that. And every time he said that, I would just melt. But it was the sound of the paintbrush on the canvas, and then he would get like different ones and kind of scrape it smoothly. It was the sounds for me, and of course his voice was very, very soothing. But I never watched a full episode. Matter of fact, I wasn't that child that would like, oh my god, it's 4 o'clock, Bob Ross is on, you know. But I'm seeing it now in my parents' house. I must have been like 4 or 5, and I was in the den because that's where I was allowed to watch TV. I didn't have a TV in my room when I was younger, and I would always fall asleep. And the joke was, especially on Saturday, because it was the den and then the kitchen, and I used to hear my mom, like, she would be in the kitchen cooking or whatever, and someone would be like, well, where's Majestic? And then she'd be like, well, if Bob Ross is on, she's probably asleep somewhere. That, and you know what I want to do? Let me know if anyone else, you know. But there was one show on TV, no matter what, and it was always at night too. It had to be at night. But when there was nothing else ever on TV, I would put on MASH. Has anyone remembered that show, MASH? I'm really, really showing my age right now, but did anyone watch MASH? Oh my god, MASH was like a death sentence for me. Again, I was born in 1980, so if it was 1985, I was 5. It was 1987, I was 7, so. But back when MASH was a hit, it was like, oh, you knew it was time for bed. You knew it was time for bed. But as I got older, you know, I never watched MASH, but if it was like something I needed to go to asleep for. I would look for MASH and put it on, and I would definitely fall asleep. But now I'm wondering, and let me know, has anyone done this? But now that I'm older, I wonder if I would appreciate that show MASH now. Probably not, would I? I mean, you guys know what I watch, because I tell you what I watch, and you guys suggest things to me. But now, being older, I do wonder, would I enjoy MASH? Anyway, let's dive into the wonderful life of Bob Ross. You know, a lot of people, associate Bob Ross with ASMR somehow, and I can see why. So, okay, this Bob Ross biography reveals the remarkable story of the Air Force Master Sergeant who would go on to teach millions the joy of painting. Right off the bat, we learned something. I did not know he was in the Armed Force military period. So, in the early 1980s, Bob Ross quietly appeared on public television stations across the United States to give viewers an experience that was part art lesson, part entertainment, and part pro bono therapy session. Pro bono. Over the course of more than 426-minute episodes, I said 30, but they're 26, Ross taught his paint techniques to millions of viewers, most of whom weren't especially interested in learning how to paint for themselves, but who were mesmerized by Ross's hypnotic smoothness and trademark permed hair. That's funny. His effortless duped whole landscapes into existence on the canvas, talking the whole time about soothing topics and encouraging his audience to discover their own inner artist. Even those in his audience who never picked up a brush still found the show oddly calming, and many reacted with real grief when their icon unexpectedly died of cancer in 1995. Despite his high ratings and devoted fan base, however, Bob Ross lived a very private life and rarely spoke about himself. There remains a lot that isn't known about the man who coined the term happy little trees. And I remember, like, he always used to do trees, and I remember, like, ocean paintings, like, of the ocean and, like, waves coming up, and I used to always be amazed on how he would, like, make water or waves look so easy. Like, he would do it, like, 1, 2, 3, This biography of Bob Ross reveals what we do know about the artist. He was very, very quiet. Alright, so Bob Ross was born in Daytona Beach, Florida on October 29th, 1942. His father was a carpenter. As a child, the young Ross always felt more at home in the workshop than he did in a classroom. Ross never shared too many details about his early years, but he did drop out of school in the 9th grade. It's believed that he then worked as his father's assistant. Yeah, back in them days, because actually my father was one of those people that, he couldn't finish high school. He had to help the family. My father comes from siblings of 9. So, and his father lived on a farm, and there was a lot of work to be done. So, a lot of the siblings did not complete high school. But, my father was fortunate enough to run a sugar factory and CEO and all that stuff. But yeah, back in them days though, money had to be made. An accident in the shop caused him the tip of his index finger. Around this time, he seems to have been self-conscious about the injury. In later years, he would position his palette in such a way to cover the finger. So that's interesting. So something happened, an accident happened in the shop, and his left index finger, the top of it got chopped off somehow. In 1961, at the age of 18, Ross joined the U.S. Air Force and was assigned to an office job as a medical record technician. He then spent 20 years in the military. Much of Bob Ross' time in the Air Force was spent at the Air Force Clinic at the Air Force Base near Fairbanks, Alaska. He performed well enough to eventually become a master sergeant, but this led to a problem. As Ross will later explain in an interview with the Orlando paper, I was the guy who makes you scrub everything, the guy who makes you make your bed, the guy who screams at you for being late to work. The job requires you to be a mean, tough person, and I was fed up with it. I promised myself that if I ever got away from it, it wasn't going to be that way anymore. So basically, he just wanted to be a happy person. He didn't want to be that mean person that yelled in people's faces and make them make their beds and scrub floors and stuff like that. He did not like it. Feeling that his job ran against his natural temperament, he swore that if he ever left the military, he'll never shout again. To lift some of the strain he was under and to make a little extra money, Ross took up painting. That's actually really cute because he was always yelling. He said that once he left the military, he would never shout again, which makes me believe that's how he got that smooth talking of his. Just very light and gentle. While residing in Alaska, Ross could hardly have chosen a better place to start painting landscapes. The area around Fairbanks featured mountains, lakes, and forests full of snow, trees, and all of them practically begging to be rendered in titanium white. These landscapes inspired Ross throughout his career, even after he moved back to Florida. Alaska must have some really nice landscapes, especially in the winter. I can just imagine. According to the biography, while Bob Ross was teaching himself to paint and to do it quickly so that he could finish a painting in 30 minutes, he found a teacher who would teach him what became his trademark style. William Alexander was a former German prisoner of war who moved to America after his release at the end of World War II and took up painting for a living. Late in life, Alexander claimed to have invented the style that taught Ross, popularly known as wet on wet, but it was actually a refinement of a style that was used by many before. His technique involved rapidly painting layers of oil over each other without waiting for the picture elements to dry. To a busy man like Master Sergeant Bob Ross, this method was perfect, and the landscapes that Alexander painted perfectly matched his preferred subject matter. Ross first came across Alexander on public television, where he hosted a painting show from 1974 to 1982, and he eventually traveled himself in 1981. After a short time, Ross decided he found his calling and retired from the Air Force to paint and teach full time. Despite his obvious talent as an artist, Ross' early years as a painter were lean ones. Being William Alexander's star pupil did not pay very well, and the few paid lessons that he managed to arrange barely covered his bills. Ross' longtime business manager, Anita Kowalski, said that his famous hairdo was a result of his money problems. He got this bright idea that he could save money on haircuts. So he let his hair grow, he got a perm, and decided he would never need to cut his hair again. Ross actually disliked the hairstyle, but by the time he had enough money to get regular haircuts, his perm had become basically a part of his image, and he felt that he was just going to stick with it. So he decided to keep the curls. By 1981, he and his hair had filled in for Alexander on the show. When Anita traveled to Florida to meet Alexander, she met Ross instead. At first, she was a little disappointed, but as Bob Ross began painting and talking in his soothing voice, Anita, who had recently lost a child in a car accident, found herself swept away by his calm and relaxing demeanor. See, that's how you know if you're doing your job. If people can forget their problems, or if people can relax to your voice or fall asleep to your voice and forget the outside world and forget their stress for just about 20 to a half an hour or however long your video is, it's completely worth it. It's completely worth it, and you have actually done your job. Approaching him after the class, she suggested a partnership and a promotional deal. He agreed, and before long, he was on his way to pop culture stardom. The Joy of Painting aired for the first time on PBS. Remember, I was struggling with that. In January 1983, and in the first of what would be hundreds of episodes, and now we know he did 400. Bob Ross introduced himself, asserted that everyone has at some time wanted to paint something, and promised his viewers that you can paint. You basically can paint whatever you want. You can also paint almighty pictures. That colorful turn of phrase was no accident. According to Anita, Ross would lie awake at night and practice one-liners for the show. He was a perfectionist. I think that's so cute. And he ran the show in a very exact and demanding way. But that's cute. Can you imagine him laying on his bed, just reciting a one-liner for the show? That's so cute. Keeping that promise that he made to himself in the Air Force, he didn't raise his voice, obviously, but he was always very firm about details, from how to light a scene to how to market his paints. He even found time for details like gentle sanding his clear plastic palette in order to cut the glare from the studio lights and thus making it less distracting show. See, he had the lighting down packed. See, he had the understanding of soothing and relaxing, no bright lights, just calm and, collective. One of the things that made Ross' show so special, apart from his relaxed attitude, was it grew out of his in-person art class. Ross was fundamentally a teacher, and the point of his show was to encourage other people to learn to paint. So he always used the same pigments and brushes to make it easier for beginners on a budget to get started for very little money. You see what I'm saying? So what they're saying is he would use a very basic palette, probably white, red, blue, green, like the basic colors. So people wouldn't get, flustered into what purples and what this and what that. And when you're starting out, everybody knows you have no money. It's like me trying to start my business. I was trying to do this Shopify store like by myself with putting no money in for ads. It doesn't work that way. Everything you have to put a little money into. But I like how he made sure he was able to do it on a budget for beginners. He also used common house paint brushes and ordinary paint scrappers rather than specialized tools, and fans of the show who wanted to paint along with him could always be ready to start painting when he did. So he used like regular paint brushes you would have around the house, little things that you can do that you don't have to spend too much money for, or you can probably find in your house. Once the show began, it unfolded in real time. The idea being that the audience could keep up with Ross as he painted his picture. Only the occasional bloopers got cut, such as the regular occasion when Ross pushed too hard on the canvas and accidentally knocked over his easel. Every painting he did on the show was one of the least 3 nearly identical copies. The dog is about to go crazy, guys. I'm sorry. Despite his unstudio air in the show, Ross painted one picture before the show that would be mounted out of sight to act as a reference during the filming process. The second was with the audience saw him paint, and the third was painted later and took much longer. This was the high quality version that would be photographed for his art books, but you could imagine having to do like 3 different paintings. Bob Ross books were an important part of the business model, especially when he just started out as painting instructor and hadn't built up an art supply line quite yet. Ross decided to not sell his original paintings, though. He did sometimes give them away for a charity auction. Eventually, his PBS show became the centerpiece for what grew into a $15 million business that sold Bob Ross approved palettes, brushes, and all types of easels around the world. He deliberately kept his line of paints as simple as possible, centered on the 8 or so colors he always used on the show. Like I said, white, black, probably green, red, the basic colors that everyone would see. That way painters could jump in and get started right away without becoming an expert in oil paintings or getting confused by the selection. In addition to the supplies, Ross remained focused on teaching his students. Personal lessons could be given for $375 an hour, and gifted students could train to become Bob Ross certified art instructor. Could you imagine you're in art school, right, and you had an internship to be part of Bob Ross's television show, All over the country, freelance small business sprung up as Ross successfully former students took on students on their own and organized regular classes. That is so amazing. Like I said, being able to have an internship working on TV with Bob Ross, or like working aside whoever, is popular in that field. And then they're showing here a Bob Ross has a son named Steve Ross, followed in his father's footsteps as a young boy and teaches art classes today as an adult. Ross students reproduce more than his wet-on-wet technique. They also beat his laid-back demeanor and relaxed, one observer called a harmless international cult based on watching Ross paint, sharing his choice quotes, and spreading the gospel that anyone could be an artist. The joy of painting went into international distribution in 1989, and before long, Ross had fans in Canada, Latin America, Europe, and all over the world. By 1994, Ross was featured on at least 275 stations, and his instructional books were sold in almost every bookstore in America. But despite his incredible success, Ross seemed to have not let his celebrity status go to his head. Though he always took an active hand in telling Anita how he wanted his business to run, he and his family continued on their suburban home and lived as privately as they possibly could. So he didn't spend his money. He wasn't out like doing all types of crazy interviews and this and that. He lived amongst his means. He lived a simple life and a quiet, private life. In the late spring 1994, Ross was unexpectedly diagnosed with late-stage lymphoma. The demands of his treatment forced him to step away from his show, and the last episode aired on May 17th. Just over 1 year later, on July 4th, 1995, Bob Ross quietly died from his illness and was buried in, well, they actually blurred it out, but he was buried in Florida, near where he lived as a child. Then someone down here said, according to an interview with Steve Ross, the son, Bob actually painted each of the paintings he did for the show 7 or 8 times. That's crazy. And then someone else said they never knew these facts. This was so interesting. One said this was interesting. I never knew all the things about Bob Ross, a very special person to me who I love and care about a lot, and recently suggested I listen to Bob Ross episodes, and that helped me fall to sleep, what led me to ASMR. And then someone else was saying, his voice is calming, put him right to sleep. I can't draw for my life, but I will watch him all day. So, like I said, let